Members, guests, and friends, welcome to the first of Impact 100 Philadelphia's fall education events this year. My name is Isabel Clark, a young philanthropist and board member of Impact 100. Most of you have been on enough Zoom calls by now to know how it goes. You'll be muted until the end of our program. Your video can be on or off, although we do love to see you. You can place questions in the chat box at any time, and we'll get to as many of them as we can during our Q&A. This program is also being recorded to share with those who can't be here. Here's the plan for the evening. We'll hear briefly about Impact's Grant Champions, a volunteer role you may want to consider assuming. Then we'll hear individually from Maria Macaluso, Executive Director of the Women's Center of Montgomery County, one of our 2020 $100,000 grantees, and from Chelsea Hicks, an Impact 100 Founders Fellow. For those who may not know, the Impact 100 Founders Fellowship is a program designed for women ages 25 to 35 who demonstrate a commitment to philanthropy and service, and who bring a diversity of thought and perspective to the grant-making process. Fellows are selected through a competitive process each summer and participate as full members of Impact 100. And as you can see by Chelsea's example tonight, often go above and beyond. Maria and Chelsea's individual remarks will be followed by a joint discussion of philanthropy moderated by grant champion Kathy Moore. We invite you to ask your questions in the chat so we can learn even more from our speakers during the Q&A period. When you type your questions in, please make sure to indicate which panelist your question is for. But first, this is the time of year when we ask women to join and be part of our collective giving circle. Simply put, the more members we have by our December 1st deadline, the more support we can give to our community. We pool our money, $1,150 each, or half of that for women under 36, and collaboratively decide where our funds will have the greatest impact. In June, we gave away $472,000 to 6 nonprofits that are meeting urgent needs in Philadelphia and the 4 surrounding counties. When this call is over, go to our website, impact100philly.org, to join us and to find a list of our grantees and learn more about why your Impact membership is so valued.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Connie Heppenstall. This is my 4th year as a member of Impact 100. I became a grant champion for the first time this year. The role of grant champion is to be the primary point of contact for the grantee. Our job is to serve as liaison between Impact 100 and the nonprofit organization to assist in reporting guidelines, communications with Impact 100, and help to disseminate any wish list items to the communications committee. There are 2 grant champions for every grantee. For the Women's Center, they are myself and Kathy Moore. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our guest, Maria Macaluso. Maria has served as Executive Director of the Women's Center of Montgomery County since 1998. Prior to joining the center, Maria has led housing discrimination programs in Philadelphia and Los Angeles. Throughout her career, Maria has sought professional opportunities that focus on empowerment and equality for underserved populations. Welcome, Maria.
Thank you. Good evening. I am so thrilled to be back here tonight speaking to you. In some ways, it seems like just weeks have passed since I addressed you as a very nervous grantee at your June meeting. I can still recapture the feelings of exhilaration, gratitude, and pride that resonated so strongly in me that night. It was truly a pivotal moment in time for me and for my organization, a moment when you feel everything and anything is suddenly possible. I was asked to speak a bit tonight about how Impact 100 support has made a difference to the Women's Center. Wow, how do I convey all of that we've been able to do because of you and how much we've accomplished since then? Your support, felt in so many ways, has been such a catalyst for innovation and growth. It's impossible to overstate the deep and meaningful impact of your recognition, as well as the very tangible accomplishments and activities that you've made possible. Beyond the monetary support, our relationship with Impact 100 members has inspired creativity and made incredible differences to our work. At a time when many of our partner agencies face crises of funding, staff burnout, and general anxiety, recognition from Impact 100 has motivated our staff and board to overcome those challenges. As we talk later tonight about the relationship between grantee and grantor, if you take nothing else away, let the message be that you should never underestimate what it means to an organization like ours to have the validation of such a dynamic and informed group and how you've inspired us. I know that I speak for many of the organizations who apply for funding when I say that our work sometimes takes us into great darkness, working with families in crisis, extreme need, and hopelessness. It's your encouragement, support, and recognition that provides an incredibly bright beacon out of that darkness, and we are grateful. So now let me give you just some of the highlights of the past 4 months. We transitioned our mandatory voluntary counselor advocate training from an in-person to a virtual platform, which enables us to provide the skills and knowledge required by the state for new volunteers to provide direct services for domestic violence victims. We are graduating our first class of 15 volunteers trained virtually on October 13th. And I'm proud to say included in that group is an Impact 100 member who discovered a calling for our mission through the grant review process. We developed videos and PowerPoint presentations on divorce, child custody, and support for our clients that will be posted on our website this month as an educational self-help resource. We contracted with a partner, Legal Aid, to host a series of workshops for our support group members to provide pro bono assistance and legal Q&A sessions for those who can't afford an attorney or who just need some general guidance through some tough times. Since June, we've assisted 38 victims and their families with emergency shelter and relocation, providing financial support for rent, security deposit, and housewares. We partnered with the sexual, gender, and acceptance group SAGA, hosting a weekly support group for LGBTQ+ members who, in addition to experiencing intimate partner violence, are experiencing COVID-19 isolation and anxiety. And then we're having our first joint town hall with them on October 24th. Our community education department expanded over the summer to include a full-time medical advocate for the first time and a financial empowerment trainer. And we were able to open a new office in Skipback in June to house our primary prevention and education training center, which now has expanded to 6 staff people. For Domestic Violence Awareness Month, which is now October, we've developed a video series for social media that includes survivor stories and messages from local politicians on the importance of domestic violence awareness. And if you haven't visited our Facebook or Instagram page, I encourage you to check out those survivor stories to see the lives you're changing for the better. We're partnering with Teen Talk, which is a crisis hotline for teenagers. And this month we are launching our teen text line for teens experiencing dating violence. It's available from 5 p.m. until midnight. First time for us to have that kind of technology and capability. Following an increase in domestic violence cases in July at Abington Lansdale Hospital, we've created an on-call advocate position 24 hours a day to make sure that victims have access to someone to speak with them 24 hours if they come in, as well as healthcare providers. To help our staff deal with anxiety as they return to work, we provided weekly self-care sessions with a mindfulness trainer who helped them identify and cope with the stress that they were feeling as they came back from COVID. And finally, in July and August, we provided domestic violence services to 990 unduplicated adult victims. All of these things and more began with the belief and confidence that we could overcome the darkness of COVID-19 and the challenges it presented to victims and to our work. It all began with your gifts of funding, of support, of faith in our abilities. And for all that, I say thank you.
Thank you, Maria. I'd like now to welcome Chelsea Hicks. She's a second-year Founders Fellow and a member of the DEI Committee and Communications team. Chelsea is currently a project manager at Fairmount Ventures, a local consulting firm to nonprofits. Prior to joining Fairmount, she worked at her alma mater, Swarthmore College, where she served as special assistant to the president. She began her career at Swarthmore in the investment office, supporting the $2 billion investment fund. Welcome, Chelsea.
Thank you so much, Connie. I appreciate it. And I first also would like to thank everyone who made this event possible tonight, with a special shout out to the program co-chairs, Nancy and Eve. I know event planning is no small task, so I'd just like to share my appreciation for your work. So tonight, I'd actually like to share a story with you. And this is something that happened to me early on in quarantine. This has happened early in the summer, during the height of the uprising. I was on the phone with the recent college graduate, a Black woman, who was seeking advice about the job interview process. She was in the final rounds of interviews and wanted a few tips. As I was chatting with her, I found myself giving her advice, like, make sure you ask if they have a commitment to being an anti-racist organization. Can you get a sense of how many people of color work at the organization? Are they expecting you to assist in any of their DEI work? If so, make sure they pay you. At some point during our conversation, she says, how come you don't get taught these things in school? How else would I know these things, Chelsea? And at first I laughed it off, right? And I chalked it up to the learning that happens once you graduate. But I think what she was saying was more profound than that, because I think these tips I was sharing with her weren't just tips, like make sure you talk about all of your accomplishments, right? They were really about her discovering if this job could be a place where she, as a Black woman, would be fully embraced and supported. What I realized is that it was yet another affirmation that women of color, and in particular Black women, must navigate the world differently. And as we all know, it really shouldn't be that way. I share this story for two reasons. So for one, because I think it reveals something that's not revealed in my bio, is that in all my work, I'm really aiming to support a world that better serves women of color, and in particular Black women. Because I honestly believe that we build a world where Black women thrive, it'll be a world in which is beyond our wildest imagination. And two, I share this because I think it's really important for all of us to share our stories, to think about those times in which we experienced or witnessed inequity or injustice or bias, those times when something has happened that made us realize the world shouldn't be this way, and how it made us feel. I think this is important because ultimately I believe we can all use the tools in our philanthropic toolbox to create the world we'd like to live in. It's in part why I joined Impact 100, and it's too why I'm so excited for our conversation tonight. So with that, I look forward to sharing a bit about my own experiences with Impact 100 and to share how we all can ensure our philanthropy can support more equitable and more inclusive communities.
Thank you, Chelsea. My name is Kathy Moore. It will be my third year as an Impact 100 member and the second year serving as a grant champion. I also participated in the grant process last year on the financial review panel. I will be serving as the moderator for this next part of the program. Maria, first question is for you. Given the uncertainty of COVID-19 and the impact it has had on organizations and philanthropy, do you see a shift in goals, activities, and priorities in your organization, and how will you communicate these changes to funders?
So I want to say that I think in most organizations, but particularly ours, there should not be a change in goals, because our goal is to make sure that victims are safe and stable. So if anything, COVID-19 would intensify that need, but not change the goal. I think what changes potentially are the activities. And in this case, some of them have to be modified due to circumstances beyond our control. For example, we do court accompaniment, but we're not allowed in the courthouse. So we had to change how we provided that service. So instead of going into the court, we are on the phone with the person before they go in and while they're in the courtroom. The volunteer training I talked about has had to change. It's no longer in person. Prevention ed changes. So I can't imagine that goals are so integral to mission that they shouldn't change really, but how you achieve them might change. And in terms of communicating change to funders, that's what I think has been great about the impact experience, is that the check-ins that you do, they're essential, because I want to say they keep the grantee honest, because you have to look at yourselves honestly and say, have I really done what I promised I'd do with this? And if you have integrity and the trust that people are giving you, you're going to look internally at that. So not only does it help the funder understand the priorities, it forces the organization to really take that hard look and say, am I doing what I said I would do?
Chelsea, what are your thoughts about this as a philanthropist?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think COVID-19 illuminated a bunch of things, if you will, but I think in particular, it illuminated the importance of staying true to a few practices that I think have demonstrated that it is important to do a few things, right, that have already been talked about before that we should just continue to do. So those things include actually listening to nonprofit organizations and taking the directive, right, listening to people like Maria and listening to what the work is that they're doing. And ensuring that we're listening very intently, right, and making sure that we're not, we're taking the direction from them, not trying to create our own direction, if you will. I think too, flexibility and response, and I think this is something that in particular Impact 100 did a great job at, right? During COVID-19, like quickly switching the process over to a virtual digital process, making sure, right, that we're able to get the grants out quickly. I think all of that too is really important. So flexibility, listening deeply. I think also this time really illuminated the importance of understanding philanthropy within the context of also government policy and also what the private sector is doing. So I think, for instance, in my own professional work, what we saw was that there was a real kind of pivot in philanthropy, right, to really supporting those direct service organizations. But however, I should also say at the same time, arts and cultures organizations are really struggling. And there was public support, right? The city government basically pulled a lot of funding away from those organizations. So I think, constantly in conversation with folks, be like, don't forget the arts and culture organizations. Actually, really, they need a lot of help too right now. So I think understanding it within the context of government policy is super important. And I think lastly, I am honestly really concerned about the recovery from COVID-19. There was a Pew study that just came out today that said 25% of Philadelphians know someone that died from COVID-19. And I think that we're going to have a really, really long road for recovery here. And I think as philanthropists, we should be prepared to really lean into that moment and really be prepared to provide more support as we go through the recovery.
Great comments, Chelsea. Maria, how have racial and social inequities affected your organization and also the communities that you serve?
I'm going to start with the victims we serve, because I know that the news stories and the marches and the escalating gun violence have really increased an already existing fear and mistrust of law enforcement. They're afraid to call the police. What if my children get shot? And so it's exacerbated some mistrust that have already existed for many of the victims that we work with. Their encounters with law enforcement haven't been that positive, and then they see the availability of guns for their offenders. So on both sides, there's a lot of fear there. And for those of us doing this work, I think there's a sincere desire for change. We want to get better. We question social and racial inequities within our organization. Are we being equal and fair to everyone? Even when we look at who comes back to the office first, it's usually the lower paid staff or whatever, who are, because they're doing the direct services. So how do we make sure, even during a pandemic, that our decisions are made in an equitable way? I think that we're trying to model best practices, but there's not a lot of guidance out there. And I want to say that a lot of us are trying to seek input and seek training. And I'm saddened to say in recent weeks, there were executive orders that were issued from the White House. There were 2 of them that banned a lot of the training that we were seeking to do. It's kind of a weird thing where no training that promotes that one race is better than another, or that says that there's inequities, or that so it's kind of, people are scared. Am I going to lose my funding? And there's threats of doing this. So I think at a time when we have the opportunity to do some sincere and well-intentioned change, we really need the support to do that. And I think there's been a lot of reaction, but I'm sad to say there's not as much action as I think there needs to be to follow up on that.
Interesting. Chelsea, how do you integrate this into your grant giving process?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I think first, in part from Maria's comments, what I think is actually could be really critical is thinking about ways that philanthropists can support DEI capacity building, right? Because I think that if there's some way that we can help support organizations in doing the DEI work and I guess essentially just being another kind of support system for that, I think that's something that could be really important. But I think I'll go back to, in terms of the grant giving process. So in terms of my experience within finance, there's like a couple of things that really emerge, right, in terms of themes when you're investing in companies. And I think as I kind of transitioned over to doing more work around nonprofits and nonprofit management, I realized how many parallels there were. And parallels, to be quite honest, that I was like, oh, this is the greatest. So some things, right, you'll see in the private sector that I think also kind of replicate itself in philanthropy, include this idea of risk, right? And this idea that organizations that haven't existed for a long time are therefore more risky, and therefore that they shouldn't be worthy of funding, right? Unfortunately, though, too, right, at the same time, when you look at, individuals starting businesses and the rates in which they're doing that, there are a lot of folks of color that are doing that. They typically have shorter track records, right, than do some other white-led organizations. So that's one thing you see in the private sector, but I also see in philanthropy. I think, too, there's also this real investment in the storytelling, right? And so and when I'm saying this, right, that oftentimes the folks that get funded are the folks that are able to tell their story best, not necessarily the folks that may have the best ideas. And so I think, too, it's kind of this sense of recognizing that there might be organizations that might be a little messy, they might be a little rough around the edges, if you will, right? But we really have to stay true to look for that idea. And then I think finally, like, you know, just as a private sector, as it happens in philanthropy, is the fact that, you know, women of color and people of color led organizations simply just don't get the same level of funding and access to funding. And this is due to a number of factors, right? Including from access to networks, to having the actual finances and the capability to be able to, you know, fill out applications, whatever may have you, right? There's a number of factors for that. But these are all things that I think, right, I've witnessed kind of in a different setting. And then I also kind of saw it kind of as a philanthropic sector. It's like, oh, wow, oh no, this is not the greatest. But I should say, right, there's some lessons learned from that. And for me, how I look at it in terms of my own personal philanthropy, and I also talk to, right, some of the changes Impact 100 is doing that I think are really important and exciting. But for my own personal philanthropy, I also try to think about, you know, how am I supporting organizations that are led by women of color and people of color? How am I supporting organizations that might not actually have been around for that long, but have a very compelling idea? How am I also thinking about, organizations that tell the best or are a little messy, that's what I should say, right? So, you know, sometimes you go on a website and it's like, oh, this website looks a little iffy. You're like, oh, I'm not sure, but it's actually worthwhile just to like try to send an email or call the person and be like, your idea seems really cool. Like, can I just talk to you a little bit more? So that too, right? Just trying not to get too distracted by the bells and whistles, if you will, and trying to find those organizations might be a little harder to find. So anyway, so that's all the ways that I'm doing it personally. I think Impact 100 has been doing some great work. I know in particular the grants committee has been doing some super cool stuff. In particular, we're going to have a stream of funding that will be able to support smaller organizations, which I think in particular really help advance our DEI goals, right? Because on average, the majority of Black-led organizations that actually have budgets that are less than $500,000. And so if we're able to kind of get this kind of pool of funding together for them, I think that'll absolutely help our work. And I think too, we can think about ways that we can support our applicants in streamlining the application, or thinking about ways how we can support nonprofit leaders through the application process. I think that too is something that we should consider. So those are my thoughts on that.
Great, great. Chelsea, what was something that was unexpected for you when you participated in the grant making process, or something surprising about Impact 100?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think hands down the FAC process. I think it was something that folks talked a lot about, and I still wasn't totally like understanding of it, but it wasn't until I was actually a part of the process that I realized the magic of it, if you will. And I think it's so great for a number of reasons, but in particular, I feel like since college, I've been craving kind of these spaces where you can be in conversation with other people around ideas and having like discourse and debate and really kind of like pushing your brain a little bit in a different kind of way. And that's in part why I think the FAC process is so special. Of course, yes, like we are getting in great conversation around the nonprofits and being able to support the nonprofits that we're in conversation about. But I think too, there's something about being in conversation and discourse with other individuals around those nonprofit organizations, in particular, I should say with women. I think it's like something very, very, very special. So that's one thing for sure that I took away from Impact 100, that I was like, oh, wow, this FAC process is definitely something to this.
I love the way you described it as magic, because it is magic. Maria, what has been unexpected or surprising for you about working with Impact 100?
I think addressing first the process that we went through this year, I've been through it before over the past 10 years, going through site visits and things. What was most surprising about the process is that with the ease, and you just made it seem so seamless when you transitioned from the site visits into a virtual process. And you just seem to turn on a dime to be able to adapt your approach to grant making, your decision making. And from externally, it seemed very seamless. It was very reassuring. And I thought that was really impressive that you can move this many people from that hands-on in-person thing to a virtual, and do it so effectively, and for the nonprofits so supportively and seamlessly. The other piece that surprised me over the years that I didn't expect with Impact were the relationships that we built with people that came out of site visits, where even, we might not have won or we might not have progressed, but that the outreach from people, the personal notes, or I'd run into people in the most unexpected circumstances and say, hey, I saw you at this. It's been really inspirational. It's been educational. It's been very, very encouraging. So I've enjoyed the relationships that develop beyond the women center impact, but Maria and the people who she met through impact have been really meaningful to me.
Great, great. And Maria, from your perspective, what is important for philanthropy to focus on at this time?
So I think it's really great that you're focusing right now on the general grants, because you're allowing organizations right now to be innovative and to build capacity. It's an uncertain future, and you're allowing us to take risk. And you were talking earlier, Chelsea, about risk. And that's the one thing, like in industry, risk is rewarded because, oh, you have to fail. But in our work, you can't try something and fail. But this allows us to try those things. And so that we can rebuild aspects of things. So I think that's phenomenal to give that money. That said, though, I think that you still have to look for accountability. There's no, even if we have to slightly change what we're doing, I think as funders, I think it's really important with that flexibility that there be expectations and accountability and dialogue about those whole things. So I would say, yes, allow for flexibility now, but it's easy as nonprofits for us to sometimes coast on our laurels. You got to really hold us to it and say, what did you really do? And I'm sorry, it seems like I'm always being shameless to my group here, but I work with so many nonprofits, and you think we all walk on water. Well, we have our bad days too. And so I think that the honest communication and setting accountability, maybe you have to revise it. Maybe we're not going to do this because we can't anymore, but here's what we're going to do and make sure that you get the impact that you wanted. So allowing flexibility with accountability is what I'd be looking for.
Great comments. And Chelsea, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I'd like to build on this idea of accountability, because I think that what I'm constantly questioning is how can we as philanthropists also hold ourselves accountable, and what does that look like? So, and I'm thinking about this in particular, in light of our recent more national, global awareness of race, if you will, right, and racial justice and racial inequity in the world. I think that there have been a lot of commitments that have been made, but I think it's also important for us to think about how are we going to hold ourselves true to those commitments, right? What does that look like? How can we ensure that when we say we are committed to being an anti-racist organization or being an organization committed to DEI, how can we continue to make sure that we do that? So I think that that's something that I'm constantly thinking about. Of course, do I have the perfect answers right now? No, not at all. But I think it's something that should definitely be thought about and be kept in mind.
Great. Chelsea, when you think about the impact of Impact 100, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, so I think about it first and foremost, definitely like on a personal level. It's been such an amazing experience, in particular with the Founders Fellows. I think I've been able to meet a group of women that have been so supportive of me in so many different ways. And in particular, so when I first joined the Founders Fellows, I was kind of in like a career transition, and I was really ready for like something new. And it was amazing. Like everyone was so forthcoming and helping me out through that process. And then actually at some point I got connected with someone who actually used to work where I'm currently working, which is at Fairmont Ventures. So I say all that to say that it's just like the network of women at Impact 100, in particular among the Founders Fellows, have just been so supportive, and it's been amazing. I think too, right, like at the end of the day, being a part of Impact 100 is really about being able to support all these amazing organizations in Philadelphia and being able to learn about them and understand all the great work that they're doing in Philly. So of course, that's like first and foremost, what also comes to mind for me is just like how important it is and how critical it is for us to be able to support these organizations in Philly. So yeah.
Great, love your enthusiasm. Maria, what are your feelings about the impact of Impact 100?
So I kind of sound like a broken record with this, but I want to say my experience over the past 10 years has really instilled a growing admiration for what you've achieved and the impact you have on organizations as we move through the review process. Not even if you get to the final, but that process is so enriching and building. And I feel like I'm channeling Sally Field when she said, they really like me. Like, you make us feel that way. And I mean it sincerely when I say that. It's beyond the money that you bring. It's through the process that we engage in a meaningful way with your members, that we have provocative discussions, and you encourage growth and change, and you help us generate new ideas. And it's not even about the winning. It's in that process when we have those discussions with you. And I think your recognition is motivational. I've seen it in myself and in my board and my staff, it's how your selection process inspires us to overcome obstacles. And lastly, I'd say the new friends we formed along the way are an added gift that I really treasure.
Well, this conversation has been most illuminating. Thank you both. At this point, let's include our viewers in the discussion. Please enter your questions in the chat, and please also specify to whom the question is directed. Connie, can you start us off with a question from the chat?
Yes, I'd be happy to. We've actually had some very, very good questions. The first one is for Maria. Are you seeing more incidences of domestic violence in this pandemic year as people are confined to their homes, or fewer cases because victims have greater difficulty leaving their homes?
And yet there's been a lot of media, like they tend to go toward the sensationalism that there's more violence. I wouldn't say that there's more. I'd say there's different kinds of victims now. I think the pandemic has brought out areas of power and control when people are isolated together, and we're starting to see different types of victims coming through that probably didn't recognize it before. We are seeing more egregious violence. Our advocate who stayed in the hospital at Abington saw some of the worst cases. She said to me, she's been doing this for 30 years. She said, it's like being back to EV 101. It's like being in the trenches again. So we saw more egregious violence and more people victimized. And some of the most sad things, I will tell you, first responders, again, back to our hospital case, we had hospital workers who were in the COVID units working all day, going home and coming in the next day with a black eye. And you knew it was in many ways that they were going home to somebody who potentially was upset that you could be bringing this home, but they were dealing with violence in their homes and then coming back to work. So the types of violence I saw were much more egregious. But to your point, there were people who didn't report because they had no place to go. There were people who didn't want to leave because of the uncertainty. Fortunately, there were hotels that we could get people that would take a lot of COVID. That was helpful to do. But even with rental housing, because of the eviction freezes, we were having trouble finding places for people to go to because there wasn't as much housing. So there were a whole mixture of new problems that we dealt with. But I wouldn't say, violence will always exist in our community, I feel like, but our job is to get someone out of there sooner. And that's COVID sort of affects our ability to get someone out of there sooner and safely.
Oh, wow. That is so interesting. Chelsea, question for you. As you think about and you sort of touched on this a little bit in one of your responses, but as you think about advice that you gave that recent grad that you mentioned, what kind of questions should we be asking organizations or, either the places where we work or in philanthropy to understand their framing of equity and inclusion? And I guess what the question means is, how can we ensure that they're living up to this value instead of giving lip service to the topic?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh gosh, I think that's an amazing question. So I think, honestly, one of the ways for me that I think that I'm able to see whether our organization is really committed to that is if they are actually committed to what I would say like principles of pay equity, right? How transparent are salaries in the organization? Are they transparent to folks across all levels of the organization? Is there a clear understanding of what compensation looks like for a certain kind of role? I think of course, I think it's also important to look at you can look at the representation, right, of the board, for instance, right? Are there folks of color on the board? Are there folks of color on the senior leadership staff? Are there different ways in which folks of color be able to be supported to kind of be in different kinds of leadership positions? But I think what I'm usually most interested in is trying to understand what I would honestly say is, what is the experience of the lowest paid person in the organization, right? Do they have the possibility and the capability to pursue another kind of option in the organization? Are they getting paid equitably, right? What does that look like? So I think for me, it's usually driven by pay and compensation policies and whether or not organizations are actually committed to that.
That's very interesting. That is, and it's also something very easily measured. And as you said, what is the leadership comprised of? That's the good
exactly.
Stuff. Yep. The follow-up question was is how do we get more Black women involved with impact?
Oh yeah, great question. Well, I should say first and foremost, the DEI committee is definitely working on that. And I think that the membership committee is in talks with us, right, to doing some of that work. But I think there's like a couple of things, right? So I think first and foremost, it is actually like partnering with other Black-led organizations to see, making sure that we're actually out there and out front and saying, we're an organization, We are, want we want you to be a part of our organization. We appreciate your insights, and actually your insights and your contributions will make our process better. I think too, then we have to also be able to clearly articulate to women of color and Black women, what are the things that Impact 100 is offering to them, right? Because I think too, sometimes when we often are thinking about these questions of diversifying, we sometimes can think about it within the sense of like, oh yeah, absolutely. Like, we want these different perspectives in the room, and that's important, but we also should be able to clearly state, here are some of the benefits of being a member of Impact 100. You're able to be in community with all these amazing women. And here, some leadership opportunities for you. So I think we also just have to work at being able to clearly articulate that, and also empowering all the members to be able to clearly lay out, right, all the benefits of being a member. So yes, those are my first thoughts.
Very interesting. Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, Maria, you've touched on some of these items before, but the question was, what new things have you done because of COVID, such as online trading, that you might keep? Oh, this is a good question. What you might keep when you don't have to anymore. Is it too soon to ask, or have you already identified some of the items that you would like to keep?
Yeah, we're really looking. I when I was a kid, I always joked that I used to rip things apart to see how they work, whether or not I could figure out how to put them back together again. So I'm a big believer in like, let's take it all apart and see how this goes. And this has been an opportunity to do that. So we found things like we created a legal triage team that's available on call to people before they go to court. So we call people before their court appearances and go through the process like a virtual court orientation. That's something I'd like to keep us doing. A lot of the ways we're training our volunteers and engaging them have changed, that include a mixture of virtual and in-person, that I would like to keep. Even there's little things like in our thrift shop, the way the operations have changed. Actually, our thrift shop is doing better for the 3-month period, July to September, than it did last year. So we've implemented strong guidelines for donations and things. So some really basic things that we've seen actually had a tangible impact on sales and things. We would keep those things. And the other big thing is the team building within my staff. I probably should have gone with that first, because we have 11 offices, we've been over the years like sort of segmented by specialty and by office. Well, we meet at least weekly as a team, as a whole staff, and then different departments we're now meeting like different days a week. And I've seen such a spirit of team building that didn't exist before. And I love that. And so I want to keep those meetings going every week and making sure that that happens.
Oh, that's very interesting. I'm seeing that same thing in my office, where we're having more meetings now. And so I'm seeing people more than I did before.
I think I might have said this to you earlier when we were chatting before the meeting, is that I think Zoom has actually been good in that way, because Zoom forces you to focus on people. Like you can't be like sitting there knitting or something. Like you have to, because people can see what you're doing. So I'm one of those people who love Zoom because it saves me the time of travel. Like I don't go to Harrisburg for meetings. I do it now so I can give my full attention, and people are watching my expression. I'm watching theirs. So I think we've engaged, maybe not the way we would in person, but in some ways it's superior for me.
Yeah, it's so true. I've been reminded on one of the chats that some of us may not know what DEI stands for, and it's been talked about tonight. That is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So in case you were puzzled by that acronym, and it was something I've learned through this process, through Impact 100. I was not familiar with that until now. I think that's all our questions for right now. I think I'll turn the screen over to Isabel.
Thanks, Connie. And thank you, Maria and Chelsea, for your time tonight and such an interesting discussion. Before we end tonight's program, I want to let you know about some upcoming events this fall. Speaking of DEI, our DEI discussion groups for Impact 100 members will be starting at the end of this month. There will be 3 of them. Size is limited, and each will meet 3 times over the next several weeks. Although the official sign-up period has closed, there are a few remaining spots. Please contact Ellen Burstein to find if you can join one of the groups. Her contact information is going to be in the chat. Our grant applicant information session, often referred to as the GAIS, will be held November 5th. This session provides important information for organizations that want to know more about our funding. Members will be receiving an invitation that can be shared with nonprofits and networks to help encourage organizations to consider applying to Impact 100. Please spread the word there. November 10th at noon is our second fall education program. We'll learn more about the work of the Youth Sentencing and Reentry Project, a 2019 grantee. We encourage you to invite any women you know who might be interested in learning about and hopefully joining Impact 100 Philadelphia. Information will be included in the next member letter and an invitation will follow. We can also always use your help to spread the word about Impact 100. If you're interested in hosting an information session for your friends, neighbors, or coworkers, the membership committee has an info session in a box that we can share with you. We'll also be holding an information session on October 20th at 7 p.m. and November 17th at 6 p.m. via Zoom, should you know anyone who might want to be interested in learning more about membership with Impact 100. And finally, December 1st, as I mentioned before, is very important. This is the membership deadline for the upcoming grant year. And of course, there's no need to wait until December 1st to join or renew. A link to our website where you can join will be put in our chat. As we say goodbye, we all be unmuted for a big round of applause for our speakers tonight. Let's hear it for our panelists.
Hey, Google.